The city was winding down as the late evening settled into a quiet hum. Streetlights flickered to life, casting a soft glow over empty sidewalks, and the occasional sound of a car's engine echoed through the stillness. Anna, a 32-year-old graphic designer, parked her car in the driveway of her suburban home after a long day of work. She was exhausted, ready to kick off her shoes and spend a quiet night alone. It had been one of those days: endless emails, clients with last-minute changes, and the typical Monday drag. As she stepped out of the car, a cool breeze greeted her, carrying the scent of rain that lingered in the air from an earlier downpour. She fumbled with her keys and unlocked the front door, grateful for the silence that greeted her inside. The house was dim, just as she had left it that morning, with the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Anna tossed her bag onto the kitchen counter and headed to the living room, switching on the lamp beside the couch. But something made her pause. The lamp. She could have sworn she turned it off before leaving. A frown creased her forehead as she stared at the small light. Maybe she'd forgotten. It wasn't unusual after a long day. The brain often worked on autopilot. Shrugging it off, she sank into the couch and reached for the remote to unwind with some TV. As the screen flickered on, she noticed another oddity: the back door was slightly ajar. A sliver of night air crept into the house, bringing with it a sense of unease. She could have sworn she locked it. She always locked the doors. Her fingers hesitated over the remote, her mind starting to piece together a puzzle that felt wrong. She stood up, walking over to the back door, her steps slow and deliberate. With a sigh, she closed the door and turned the lock, the metallic click of the deadbolt bringing a fleeting sense of security. I must be tired, she thought. Just forgetful. But as the night wore on, more little things began to nag at her. A coffee mug that had been in the sink that morning was now on the kitchen table. The hallway light was on, but she distinctly remembered switching it off before she left. It felt as though the house was playing tricks on her, and the unsettling thought began to creep into her mind: was she alone? Anna shook off the feeling. Maybe she was just overworked, her mind running wild from stress. She grabbed her phone, deciding to make a cup of tea and settle in for the night. Just as the kettle started to boil, a faint sound made her freeze in place. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A noise. She stood still, her ears straining to pick it up again. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming from above. Anna's eyes darted to the ceiling. The attic. Her pulse quickened as her mind raced, trying to rationalize the sound. Maybe something had fallen, or a loose pipe was making noise. She had lived in the house for 3 years and had always thought of the attic as nothing more than a dusty storage space. But now, with the sounds echoing faintly from above, it felt like an alien, foreboding place. Grabbing her phone and a flashlight, Anna moved cautiously toward the hallway where the attic hatch was located. She hesitated beneath it, staring up at the small wooden door. The footsteps had stopped, and the silence was suffocating. Every instinct in her body told her to walk away, to lock herself in her room, but curiosity mixed with a creeping sense of dread compelled her to check. She pulled down the attic ladder, the wooden creaks reverberating through the house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she climbed up, her flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness above. She poked her head into the attic, sweeping the light from one corner to the next. Nothing. Just the usual clutter: old boxes, forgotten belongings, and a layer of dust that seemed undisturbed. Anna exhaled a shaky breath, feeling foolish for letting her imagination get the best of her. She climbed back down, closing the hatch and heading back to the living room. But even as she tried to relax, the unease lingered. Something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. The house felt different, colder somehow. Later that night, she sat in bed scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself. A sudden thought popped into her head: her home security system. She had installed cameras inside and outside the house when she first moved in, more out of habit than necessity. It gave her peace of mind knowing she could review footage if something strange happened. And tonight, something strange was definitely happening. With a few taps on her phone, she pulled up the security footage. She started with the front door camera, rewinding to earlier that evening when she arrived home. Everything looked normal. She watched herself enter the house, the door closing behind her. Then she switched to the living room camera. She scrubbed through the footage quickly, looking for anything out of place. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then, something made her freeze. Her heart dropped into her stomach as she watched the footage again, slower this time. There it was. A shadow. Faint but unmistakable. Someone had entered her house just minutes before she got home. But as she scrolled through the footage, her blood ran cold. There was no footage of them leaving. Anna's hands trembled as she gripped her phone, dread flooding her system. She switched to the back door camera, expecting to see the intruder slip out into the yard. But no, the figure never appeared. They had come in but never left. Panic gripped her as she realized the horrifying truth: whoever had entered her house was still inside. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, snapping her attention away from the screen. Anna's heart pounded against her ribs as she strained to listen. Another creak, closer this time, the sound of someone moving, slowly. "I need to get out." She grabbed her phone and quietly slipped out of bed, her feet barely making a sound on the floor. She made her way toward the back door, every fiber of her being focused on staying silent. The house felt like a living entity now, every creak and groan magnified in the suffocating quiet. As she reached the kitchen, she heard it again: footsteps, soft and deliberate, coming from the direction of the living room. She was no longer alone, and the intruder was moving closer. Her shaking hands fumbled with the lock on the back door. She could hear them now, just beyond the kitchen. With a final twist, the door unlocked. Anna yanked it open and sprinted into the night, the cold air hitting her like a slap to the face. She ran to her car, not daring to look back, her mind consumed with fear. Once safely inside the car, she locked the doors and called the police, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, but she managed to give her address. The minutes that passed before the police arrived felt like hours. Every shadow, every rustle in the wind felt like the intruder creeping closer. When the police finally arrived, Anna watched from her car as they swept the house. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came to her window. His face was calm, but there was a weight to his expression. "We didn't find anyone inside," he said. "But there's something you need to see." Anna's stomach dropped as she followed the officer back into the house. They led her to the attic hatch, which was now open. Inside, lying among the dusty boxes, was a makeshift bed, blankets, food wrappers, and empty water bottles scattered across the floor. The officer looked at her, his voice grim. "It seems someone has been living in your attic for quite some time." Anna's mind reeled, the horror of the situation sinking in. The intruder hadn't just been in her house that night, they had been there for weeks, maybe even months, silently watching her. She would never feel alone in her house again,